Welcome to this rapid revision video looking at Norman society as a way of introducing the theme of crime and punishment during the Norman period. So let's get straight into it. Perhaps naturally this all begins with the Norman Conquest. On the 14th of October 1066 the Normans won the Battle of Hastings. The Saxon King Harold was dead and William, Duke of Normandy, had become William the Conqueror. This led to a massive shift in English government, laws, land ownership and culture. However, not all Saxons accepted this change, and especially early in his reign, William had to deal with a series of rebellions against his rule. This, of course, led to reprisals. William had hoped that the Saxon nobility would have been loyal to him. However, there were a series of rebellions in the north, and this is how William responded. It was incredibly brutal, even by the standards of the day. William ordered soldiers north. Castles were built, and men roamed the countryside unopposed, executing people at will. Property was destroyed, homes and crops were burnt, livestock killed, and crops were destroyed to prevent a successful harvest. Soldiers killed and terrified the guilty and innocent alike. This intimidation discouraged future rebellion. The fear, destruction, and devastating famine resulted in huge numbers of refugees. As many as 100,000 to maybe even 150,000 people died, a huge number given the population at the time, which was only about 2 million people. These events all describe William's response, called the Harrying of the North. This is because there had been a series of rebellions in the north, and so this is one of William's ways of dealing with crimes against authority, but this is as extreme as it got. However, even by the standards of the time, this is so brutal that the almost contemporary chronicler, Odoric Vitalis, felt compelled to write about it. In his anger, he commanded that all crops, herds, chattels, and food of every kind be brought together and burned to ashes. As a consequence, so terrible a famine fell upon the humble and defenceless people that more than 100,000 Christian folk of both sexes, young and old alike, perished of hunger. However, it's important to realise that William's way of running his country was based upon loyalty and rewards, as well as brutal punishments. Perhaps the most important example of this was the feudal system. To help him maintain control, William introduced the feudal system, which he invented specifically for England, which organised land holding based upon a system of privileges and obligations. As you can see, it was arranged as a hierarchy with the king at the top. Firstly, the king owned all the land in England. He made the laws. He granted some of his land to the nobility, but this is an important distinction. The nobility might hold land from the king, but they didn't own it. If he so wanted, William could take it back. The nobles held land from the king. This made them wealthy and powerful. William granted permission to build castles to help them control local people. The nobility might provide advice, but they were also expected to supply soldiers and horses for the army. Then there were the knights. Knights were granted smaller mansions and estates. They fought for the nobles and the king, owing up to 40 days of compulsory military service every year. But they wouldn't really want to be away for any longer than that, otherwise their peasants might not be working hard enough on the land, and that brings us to the lowest class of people in Norman society. Peasants and serfs had to work for their lord for little pay, usually just whatever they could grow from rented land when they had finished their work for their overlord. They had no power or say in the law whatsoever. I briefly mentioned castles. These were an incredibly important form of Norman control. The feudal system transferred virtually all power and land ownership from Anglo-Saxon nobles to Norman ones. This resulted in a lot of resentment. To control unhappy and rebellious populations, nobles built castles. Firstly, these were military bases, providing a secure site from which soldiers could control and oppress. The most common type early on was the motte and bailey castle, and you can see a picture of one at the top right of the screen there. These were very simple, very quick, and very easy to build. You can see that the bailey, which is the enclosure with the main support buildings, is surrounded by a wooden palisade fence, timber being a very easily available local resource. The ditches that have been dug out have been piled into a big mound or motte, on which a final keep can be built as a last stand. However, these were brand new structures, and local Saxons were often forced to build them, which only added to their intimidation factor, and that's the second part. They were big structures, and a permanent reminder of the new ruling power. The architecture was deliberately intimidating. Take for example this castle keep at Rochester in Kent. This was on the main road to London and one of a string of castles from Dover up through Canterbury, Rochester and then on to London and the Tower of London itself. This is one of the tallest keeps in the entire country, and you can see it's built to be imposing. Consider that few people would have been familiar with even two-storey buildings, let alone buildings of this sort of scale. This was a clear indication that the Normans were going nowhere. Through the feudal system and military might, the power of the king massively increased in Norman times. Let's sum up. The Normans took over control of England after the Battle of Hastings in 1066. This resulted in a massive change to society and government. Some Saxons rebelled against the king. Rebels faced severe punishments, as in the Harrying of the North. William kept control through the use of landholding, the feudal system, and castles. As a result, the power of the king to make and enforce laws increased. I hope that's been a useful introduction to the Norman society for you. If it has, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel for more crime and punishment content, which will be coming soon. If you've got a topic that you're desperate for me to cover, please pop it in the comments below and I'll see what I can do. But for now, thanks very much for watching and goodbye.